Okay, this is quiz 9.2.4 on imperialism. We're going to get started by showing you guys a political cartoon that, not that one, that I find very interesting. There's this guy named Rudyard Kipling, and he wrote about the fact that it was the burden or the job of the white man to basically take with him all of the colored people, especially peoples of Africa or indigenous people, and carry them to a civilized world, make them better, if you will. And that was the white man's burden. They need to do this. So in this political cartoon, you have the U.S. is the person, and then you have an African indigenous who he's carrying. He's carrying up the hill, and it looks like there's boots, there's rocks, and stuff in the hills. But the top is a schoolhouse, so he's going to take you to school so that you can get educated, and I have to help you do this, and things like that. So basically, is this sort of here we go. It sounds a little bit better. Is this sort of thinking mind frame that a lot of whites had at this time, and they use this as their justification for what they were doing for imperialism. Imperialism, if you don't really understand what it means, basically imperialism is you take control over another country. Most of the time that this is seen as you have a colony, you set up a colony in that other country, but doesn't always have to have a colony involved. But anything that is controlling another country away from your own individual country, that is imperialism. The only reason why imperialism in the late 1800s, early 1900s was possible was because of industrialization. We've been talking about the last few quizzes, and because they needed all those resources for industrialization, all those raw resources, more of it, and you need cheap labor, you get those from a country that you can control. So they're looking for more countries, and that's why all these world powers are starting to control and imperialize all over the country, all these countries that are less superior to them. Basically, every powerful country in Europe did it, including Japan and the US. But other than that, it's mostly Europe who did this. The term sphere of influence is basically anything that I can touch and control. So if I can touch you and control you even just a little bit, you are under my sphere of influence. I can influence you. I can control you. So that's what that means. And now a sphere of influence, if you have a sphere of influence, you're not really colonizing someone, but you still have control over them, which is still under the umbrella of imperialism. Okay. So if you control at any point, it's imperialism. If you set up full-on control where you have people there and you're running it, and it's a full-on colony, then it's still imperialism, but it's like the more, I don't know, hardcore imperialism tactic. I'm going to show you guys a map too, just to demonstrate how prevalent this idea of imperialism was. So if you look at this map, this is pretty crazy, I think. This is 1914. You will see by colors all the different countries that people are controlling. So this color is the independent states. Okay, they're not controlled by another country. But you've got this all controlled by France here. You've got Great Britain largely in here. So Africa is mostly, Germanic Empire. We've got the Netherlands. They liked out here a lot. Let's see, United States we have here in the Philippines. And we've got Great Britain here in Australia and India. Yeah, so you can see there's a lot of controlling, especially right here. But earlier quiz, we talked about this was the first wave imperialism with the colonies. Okay, Now that they have all declared independence, now this, and this, and these are the areas. Okay. So first they went to the new areas. And then the second wave, they're like, all right, well, let's conquer these areas because we know they're not as powerful as we are. So we'll just take over because we need more resources. So one thing that is not very good when talking about imperialism is they argued in defending their imperialism, they argued not only just trying to say we're just superior as superior race, but they try to use science behind it to try to defend themselves. So we have Darwin, Charles Darwin. He is a scientist. He has this theory of evolution where every stage of man becomes better and better. So they used that theory of evolution to justify, well, you're kind of more behind. We're more evolved than you are, so we deserve, is just part of their rationale. A lot of countries, especially in Europe, use eugenics to promote their domination. Eugenics is basically where you try to get rid of a specific race, or at least you only care about a specific race and no others. For example, Hitler used eugenics in saying that the Aryan blonde hair, blue-eyed race was the dominant race ever. So, which is really funny because he is brown hair and brown-eyed, right? I don't know. I would have said brown hair, brown-eyed if I were brown hair, brown-eyed, but to each its own. And then another one of Charles Darwin's theories is something that we call social Darwinism. That's basically survival of the fittest. So if you're the fittest, you survive. If you're not the fittest, you're not going to survive. And this is honestly a lot of the thinking that people have had for centuries. Don't get me wrong, this is nothing new. People have been imperializing for a very long time in our world's history. So don't think that is anything new, because it's not. The only reason why this is kind of new is because of the technology that they use to imperialize. So the Apex readings had talked about the guns and the machines that they had. So only because of industrialization, we had the tools to make this go by like more rapidly and conquer more land than typically done before. So that's what's different about it. There are goods and bads about imperialism. Bads are very easy to see. People are losing lives, losing their culture, losing their land. The goods are not so easy to see sometimes. We have new technologies that people are able to have because of imperialism. And it did, if not in the short term, but definitely long term, it lifted both sides of the equation out of poverty better. So those countries that were the imperialist countries, more of their people were out of poverty, and the countries that were not imperialists, who were being conquered, more of their people were lifted out of poverty. So unfortunately, this is definitely something that people use to say, well, see, look, it was good. See, look at what happened. They wouldn't have had this if it were not for us. But when you force someone to have something, even if it is better, it still wasn't done by their choice, right? One thing that is really interesting, we saw on that map about Africa. Okay. I'm going to show you this map. So this is called the Scramble for Africa. So in 1884, European countries were starting to really want Africa. Okay. So this is just getting into it. Okay. 1884. And so, because we already have, France is already in here. Britain is already in here. Okay. So what we have is they have something that's called a Berlin Conference, where before everybody starts scrambling, they call it a scramble for Africa because it's like they're clawing after each other, climbing on top of each other, trying to grab a portion of Africa to claim as their own. That's why they call it the scramble. So basically they all sit down, they're like, okay, who's going to get this one? I imagine like it was one of those auction bids where there's like, hey, come on, one of those. That's what would happen if it were going on today. But I mean, that's really kind of what happened is they they were talking in a civilized way. Who should get this one? Why? Okay, well, if you get that one, then I get this one. And so they kind of section out the areas, and you have the result is what is here in this map. This is the result of that Berlin Conference. They dictate who's going to be controlling what area. And what's interesting is in the Berlin Conference, none of the African countries were invited, surprisingly, right? It was really quick. As you can see, there's 30 years right here in between these two dates. It only took about 30 years to basically control all of Africa. Only a small, tiny, about basically like Ethiopia. There's only 2 countries that were not controlled. 2 out of like the 30, like 40 different countries. That's it. So the reasons why they wanted to control Africa are the same reasons why we're told that English came here to the Americas: gold, God, and glory. They wanted the gold, the money for the resources. God, they wanted to convert people to their religions. And glory, they wanted to be the ones who, look what we did, look what our country did. You know, the nationalist kind of fervor went over them. And their borders that they have here, which a lot of them are still in place today. A lot more countries today, but a lot of these borders are still pretty close to what they're at today. They ignored all cultural differences, language differences that were there before. So they just were like, they just kind of carved up where they thought they should carve up. It's kind of like, I know that the Utes and Navajos, they're not very, tight with each other, right? So what if they just carved it halfway through the Ute traditional lands, and half the Utes have to be with the Navajos, and the other half of the Utes have to be with the Shoshones up there, and they don't get their own area just to themselves? Like, that would cause some conflicts, right? Yeah, absolutely. Many of these countries, even after they left, even after all these European powers left their area and stopped controlling them anymore, they were still economically dependent, because when they would come in, say this country would come in and suck up, they would say, oh, we're only producing gold here, which was common at probably more around here. Let's say this one. They're only producing gold, so they're only going to create things and make things to help with the gold industry. And then once they leave, all of a sudden there's still no infrastructure for anything else. There's no way for them to keep themselves economically independent, because they were only dependent on gold. And now that the country is gone and Germany is gone and they've sucked it all out, what do you have left? So even after they left, they still were economically dependent on these countries, which is still imperialism even after they had left, which, oh man. So there was no balanced economy that was set up at all. They just left it in shambles. And that is one big reason I strongly believe that a lot of these African countries could be pretty well industrialized today had they had been given a balanced economy when they were being colonized. For example, here in America, we were given a balanced economy when we were here. When English was here, because it was a fully functioning economy. They had everything that they needed to keep going. They didn't do that here. So because they didn't do that, they probably didn't care to do that, honestly, because none of them really lived here permanently like they did in the American colonies. But yeah, if they did, I think that a lot of them could have been, very comparable to where we're at today. So so that is it for this quiz, first quiz in 9.2.